Hi, enjoy the video.
I still remember the first time I saw Emily. It was one of those moments where the world seems to slow down, every detail etched into memory. We were both at a college library, not because we were particularly studious, but because it was one of the few places open late where you could get a good coffee. She was sitting at a corner table, her dark hair tied up in a messy bun, completely engrossed in whatever book she was reading. I'd like to say I made a smooth approach, but I didn't. I walked past her table at least 3 times, pretending to look for something until she finally looked up and asked, "Can I help you?" Somehow, instead of laughing me off, she smiled. That was the beginning of everything. Emily was sharp and driven, the kind of person who made you want to do better just by being around her. She was studying business and already had her sights set on a big career, while I was fumbling my way through an engineering program I wasn't entirely sure I wanted. Still, we clicked. There was something about the way she challenged me, the way she could make me laugh even when I was drowning in self-doubt. We started dating not long after that first awkward encounter. Our early days were a whirlwind of late-night talks, road trips, and dreams about the future. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Emily and I were different in ways that sometimes felt complementary and other times like they'd tear us apart. She was ambitious to the point of being relentless, always looking for the next milestone to conquer. I was more laid back, content to take things as they came. We fought about it often. Emily would get frustrated with what she saw as my lack of direction, while I'd feel like she was always pushing me to be someone I wasn't. There were times when I thought about walking away, wondering if we were too different to make it work. But then we'd have these moments, quiet nights where it was just us. No goals or expectations, just laughter and love. And I'd think, this is worth fighting for. After college, we moved in together. Those first years were tough. Neither of us was making much money, and we were juggling long hours at our respective jobs. Emily landed a position at a promising tech startup, while I found work as an entry-level engineer. Our tiny apartment became a battleground for every disagreement we'd ever had. Whose turn was it to cook? Why wasn't I studying for a certification to advance my career? Why couldn't she take a day off and relax for once? But it wasn't all bad. Even in the midst of our arguments, we loved each other fiercely. Emily's determination inspired me, and she'd always say that my steadiness kept her grounded. We had this unspoken agreement. No matter how much we fought, we wouldn't let it break us. We were in it for the long haul. When I proposed to her, it wasn't some grand, orchestrated event. It was a quiet moment on the rooftop of our building, the city lights twinkling below us. I didn't even have a ring yet, just a promise that I'd get one as soon as I could afford it. Emily laughed, tears in her eyes, and said, "Yes." Our wedding was small but beautiful. We didn't have the money for anything extravagant, but Emily made sure every detail was perfect. We wrote our own vows, and I meant every word when I told her she was my partner, my equal, the person I wanted to build a life with. At the time, I believed that with all my heart. Looking back, those early years feel like a lifetime ago. The optimism, the belief that love was enough to weather anything, it all feels so distant now. I didn't know it then, but the seeds of our future troubles were already being planted. Our differences, the very things that had drawn us together, would one day threaten to tear us apart. After we got married, the honeymoon phase didn't last as long as I'd hoped. Real life hit us hard and fast. Emily threw herself into her job, working longer and longer hours. Her ambition was paying off. She was quickly rising through the ranks at her company. I was proud of her, but it also created tension. I wasn't climbing the ladder at the same pace, and I could feel the unspoken judgment in the air. Emily never said it outright, but I could tell she wished I was more like her, more driven, more focused on the future. Our fights changed, too. They weren't about silly things like cooking or cleaning anymore. They were bigger, heavier. Emily wanted to start saving for a house, but I was still trying to pay off student loans. She wanted to network and attend company events, while I'd rather stay home and watch a movie. Every disagreement felt like a referendum on our relationship, and I started to wonder if we had made a mistake. But then there were the good days, the days that reminded me why I fell in love with her. We'd take long walks in the park, talking about everything and nothing. We'd cook dinner together, laughing as we stumbled through recipes neither of us knew how to follow. For every argument, there was a moment of connection that made me believe we could make it through. When Emily told me she was pregnant with our first child, everything shifted. I'd never seen her so happy, so radiant. She threw herself into preparing for the baby with the same energy she brought to her career, researching everything from cribs to college savings plans. I was nervous, terrified actually, but her excitement was infectious. For a while, it felt like we were on the same team again, working toward a shared goal. Looking back, those months before the baby was born were some of the happiest of my life. We were a team again, united by this tiny life we were bringing into the world. I thought, maybe naively, that this was the beginning of a new chapter for us, one where our differences would matter less and our love would matter more. But life has a way of complicating things. Parenthood brought its own set of challenges, ones we weren't entirely prepared for. And while I hoped the birth of our child would bring us closer together, I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily and I were still standing on opposite sides of a widening divide. When our first child, Mia, was born, it was as though the world tilted on its axis. Nothing else seemed to matter except that tiny, fragile life we had created together. Emily was incredible during those first few months. She approached motherhood the same way she approached everything else in life, with laser focus and relentless determination. She had read every book, joined every mom group, and had our schedule planned down to the minute. At first, it felt like we were a stronger team than ever. Late nights with Mia screaming in her crib didn't feel so overwhelming when Emily and I tackled them together. We traded off diaper changes, midnight feedings, and soothing lullabies. There were moments, in the stillness of those early hours, when I looked at Emily and thought, we've got this. But as the months turned into years, the cracks in our relationship started to widen. Parenthood is exhausting in ways no one can truly prepare you for. The sleep deprivation, the constant demands, the sheer weight of responsibility. It was unrelenting, and it changed us. Or maybe it just amplified the differences that had always been there. Emily threw herself into being the perfect mom, just as she'd thrown herself into her career. She wanted Mia to have every opportunity, every advantage. Playgroups, music classes, swim lessons. Our weekends became a blur of scheduled activities. I, on the other hand, just wanted to slow down. I wanted lazy Sunday mornings and impromptu trips to the park. But every time I suggested we take a step back, Emily would look at me like I didn't understand what it took to give our daughter the best. Our arguments shifted focus, but they didn't go away. If anything, they became more frequent. We fought about everything from how to discipline Mia to how much screen time she should have. Emily wanted structure and rules. I wanted flexibility and fun. It was like we were speaking different languages, each of us convinced the other didn't care enough or was doing it all wrong. Then came the twins. We hadn't planned for them, at least not so soon. Mia was only 3 when we found out Emily was pregnant again. I was thrilled, if a little nervous. Emily was overwhelmed. She didn't say it outright, but I could see it in the way she buried herself in work even more than usual. We'll figure it out, I told her one night, as we lay in bed, her back turned to me. We always do. She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, almost fragile. I don't know if I can do this again. That was the first time I realized just how much pressure Emily was under. She was carrying the weight of being a mother, a wife, and a high-achieving professional, and it was crushing her. I tried to be there for her, to take on more of the parenting load, but nothing I did ever seemed to be enough. She had built this image of who she needed to be, and anything less felt like failure to her. When the twins, Max and Sophie, were born, life became a juggling act on steroids. 3 kids under 5 is no joke. Our days were a blur of bottles, diapers, tantrums, and bedtime battles. We were always tired, always stretched too thin. Emily's job became her escape, and I just felt stuck. I loved our kids more than anything, but I started to resent how much our lives revolved around them. There was no room for us anymore. Date nights became a distant memory, and even when we managed to carve out a few minutes together, it felt forced. We'd sit on the couch, too exhausted to talk, staring at our phones or the TV. The connection we'd once shared was slipping away, and neither of us seemed to know how to stop it. Financially, things were tight. With 3 kids, daycare costs were astronomical, and my salary as an engineer barely covered our share of the bills. Emily's career, on the other hand, was taking off. She'd moved up to a management position at her company, and her paycheck reflected it. At first, I was relieved. Her success meant we could breathe a little easier, but it also shifted the balance in our relationship. Emily had always been ambitious, but now that ambition seemed to consume her. She was traveling more for work, staying late at the office, and spending less time at home. I tried to be understanding. I knew she was doing it for us, for our family, but it was hard not to feel left behind. I was the one taking Mia to soccer practice, helping Max and Sophie with their homework, and making dinner most nights. I felt like a single parent sometimes, and it was lonely. The kids noticed, too. "Why isn't Mommy home for dinner?" Mia asked one evening, her big brown eyes filled with confusion. I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that their mom is working late because she's trying to provide for them, even if it means missing out on the little moments? I didn't want to resent Emily, but I could feel it building inside me. Every missed dinner, every late-night work call, every business trip felt like another brick in the wall between us. I missed her, but I didn't know how to reach her. And the truth was, I wasn't sure she wanted to be reached. Our arguments became colder, less about solving problems and more about venting frustrations. "You don't appreciate what I'm doing for this family?" she said one night, after I'd asked her to cut back on her travel schedule. "And you don't see how much I'm holding things together at home?" I shot back. We were stuck in a vicious cycle of blame and defensiveness, each of us too wrapped up in our own struggles to see the other's pain. I started wondering if this was just what marriage looked like after kids. A slow drift into parallel lives, where love was replaced by duty and connection by routine. But then there were the kids, our 3 beautiful, chaotic, wonderful kids. They were the glue holding us together, even as everything else seemed to be falling apart. On the good days, when we were laughing over breakfast or playing tag in the backyard, it felt like maybe we could find our way back to each other. But those days were becoming fewer and farther between. And as much as I hated to admit it, I was starting to wonder if love was enough to keep us together. If I thought parenting young kids was hard, parenting them as they got older turned out to be a battlefield of its own. By the time Mia was 10 and the twins were 7, it felt like the house was constantly on edge. The chaos that had once seemed endearing now felt like cracks in the foundation of our family. And more often than not, Emily and I were on opposite sides of every argument. The first major blow-up came with Mia. She'd started pushing boundaries, as kids do, but Emily's reaction was intense. Mia wanted to try out for the school soccer team, but Emily insisted that she focus on her piano lessons instead. "She's got real talent," Emily argued, her voice rising. "If she sticks with piano, she could go places. Soccer? It's a nice hobby, but it's not going to help her get into a good college." I sighed, trying to keep my own temper in check. "She's 10, Emily. Let her try both. If she decides she doesn't like soccer, fine. But why not let her figure that out for herself?" Emily crossed her arms, her expression hard. "Because kids don't know what's best for them. It's our job to guide her. Guiding her isn't the same as controlling her." I shot back. The argument ended the way most of our fights did, with Emily storming out of the room and me left to pick up the pieces. I found Mia in her bedroom, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, kiddo," I said, sitting beside her. "Your mom's just trying to do what she thinks is best. She loves you. Then why won't she let me do what I love?" Mia asked, her voice cracking. I didn't have an answer. I told her she could go to the tryouts anyway, and when Emily found out later, it sparked another round of shouting. The twins weren't immune to the tension either. Max was quieter, more sensitive, and Sophie was the bold one, always pushing limits. It was Sophie who got caught sneaking a tablet into bed one night to play games, which turned into a huge argument over screen time. Emily wanted to confiscate the tablet indefinitely. I thought a warning and a one-night punishment would suffice. "You're too soft on them," Emily said, exasperated. "That's why they think they can get away with anything. And you're too strict." I countered. They're kids, Emily. They're going to make mistakes. That's how they learn. But she didn't see it that way. To Emily, discipline was black and white. Rules were rules, and breaking them meant consequences. To me, it was all about balance, teaching the kids responsibility without crushing their spirits. The problem was, our parenting styles were so different that the kids started exploiting it. They'd come to me for permission when they knew Emily would say no, and vice versa. It created a rift not just between us as parents, but between us as a couple. "We need to be a united front," Emily said one night after the kids were in bed. Her tone was sharp, her eyes tired. "The kids are playing us against each other." "I know," I admitted. "But we can't be a united front if we don't agree on anything." "Then maybe you should start agreeing with me," she snapped. Her words stung. But what hurt more was the realization that she didn't trust my judgment as a father. It felt like she saw me as a weak link, someone who was holding the family back. And maybe I was. I wasn't as strict as her, and I didn't have her drive to push the kids to excel. But I loved them, and I wanted them to feel supported, not smothered. The divide between us grew wider as the kids got older. Mia's budding independence clashed with Emily's need for control, and I often found myself caught in the middle. Max started withdrawing, spending more time alone in his room, and Sophie's rebellious streak only intensified. Every day felt like a new battle, and I was running out of energy to fight. It wasn't just the kids, though. Emily and I had lost whatever connection we once had. Our conversations were transactional: who's picking up the kids, what's for dinner, when's the next parent-teacher conference. The laughter, the intimacy, the sense of partnership, it was all gone. I missed her, but I didn't know how to reach her. And the truth was, I wasn't sure she wanted to be reached. One night, after another fight about Mia's soccer schedule, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, staring at an old photo of Emily and me from our college days. We looked so happy, so full of hope. I wondered where those people had gone and if they'd ever come back. Emily was in the kitchen, pacing as she talked on the phone. Work, of course. It was always work. She'd been putting in more hours than ever, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was using her job as an escape. Maybe I was doing the same in my own way. I'd started volunteering to coach Mia's soccer team, partly to spend more time with her and partly to avoid being at home. It felt like we were both running in opposite directions, each of us trying to avoid facing the truth. The kids picked up on the tension, and it started affecting them too. Mia became more defiant, pushing boundaries with both of us. Max's grades started slipping, and Sophie got into trouble at school for talking back to her teacher. It was like the whole family was unraveling, and I didn't know how to stop it. One night, after the kids were in bed, Emily and I sat down to talk. It wasn't a fight this time, just a quiet, painful conversation about where we were and how we'd gotten here. "Do you ever feel like we've lost ourselves?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily didn't answer right away. She stared at the floor, her expression unreadable. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I don't know how to fix it." "Maybe we need help," I said. "Counseling, or something." She shook her head. "We don't have time for that. Between the kids and work, it's just not realistic." Her words felt like a dismissal, like she'd already given up. I wanted to argue, to tell her that we couldn't afford not to make time, but I didn't have the energy. Instead, we sat there in silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I wondered if this was just how it ended. Not with a dramatic fight or a sudden betrayal, but with a slow, quiet drifting apart. I didn't want to believe that, but I couldn't deny the possibility. And for the first time, I started to wonder if love really was enough to hold us together. The day Emily got her promotion was the day everything started to unravel in earnest. She came home late, as usual, but this time with a bottle of champagne and an air of triumph that hadn't been there in years. The kids were already in bed, and I was sitting on the couch, half watching a rerun of some old sitcom when she walked in, her smile radiant. "I did it," she announced, holding up the champagne. "I got the VP position." For a moment, her excitement was contagious. I jumped up, grinning, and pulled her into a hug. "That's amazing, Emily. You worked so hard for this." She kissed me quickly and then made a beeline for the kitchen to pop the champagne. I followed her, grabbing glasses as she poured. For a brief moment, it felt like we were celebrating something together, like we were a team again. But as the initial excitement wore off, a knot formed in my stomach. Her new role meant more hours, more travel, and, inevitably, less time at home. I knew what this promotion meant to her. It was the culmination of years of hard work, the realization of dreams she'd had since college. But I couldn't help feeling like it came at a cost, one our family couldn't afford. Over the next few weeks, Emily's schedule became more demanding than ever. Early mornings, late nights, and weekends spent glued to her laptop. The kids barely saw her, and when they did, she was too tired or too distracted to really engage. I tried to pick up the slack, but it wasn't easy. Mia was now a full-blown preteen with an attitude to match. Max had developed a quiet stubbornness, and Sophie was constantly testing boundaries. The first major blow-up came on a Saturday morning. Mia had a soccer game, and Emily had promised she'd be there. But when the time came to leave, she was still on a conference call in her office. "Mom's not coming, is she?" Mia asked, her tone flat but her eyes betraying her disappointment. "She said she'd try," I replied, forcing a smile. "But hey, I'll be there, and we'll have fun." Mia just shrugged and grabbed her bag. I wanted to defend Emily, to explain that her job was important, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. Because the truth was, I was just as disappointed as Mia. When we got home after the game, Emily was still in her office. I waited until the kids were occupied before confronting her. "You promised Mia you'd be there?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Emily sighed, not even looking up from her laptop. "I told her I'd try. Something came up." "Something always comes up," I shot back. "She needed you there, Emily. We all do." She closed her laptop with a sharp snap and turned to face me. "Do you think this is easy for me? I'm doing the best I can, Jake. Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under?" "And what about the pressure I'm under?" I countered. "I'm the one holding everything together while you're off chasing your career." Her eyes narrowed, and her tone turned icy. "Don't you dare make this about me being ambitious. I'm doing this for our family." But it didn't feel that way. It hadn't felt that way in a long time. The tension between us spilled over into our parenting. The kids started noticing that we were on opposite sides of every decision. Mia wanted to go to a friend's birthday party, but Emily said no because she had a piano recital the next day. I told Mia she could go if she promised to be back early, which led to yet another argument with Emily. "You're undermining me," she said, her voice low but furious. "How are the kids supposed to respect me if you keep going behind my back? And how are they supposed to trust us if all they see is you saying no to everything?" I shot back. The twins weren't immune to the chaos either. Max had started struggling in school, and his teacher suggested we get him tested for ADHD. I thought it was a good idea, but Emily was resistant. "He's just distracted," she said. "Probably because he spends too much time on his tablet. Or maybe he's struggling and needs help," I argued. "This isn't about blaming him or us. It's about figuring out what he needs." The conversation ended with Emily walking away, muttering about how she didn't have time for this right now. Sophie, on the other hand, had become increasingly rebellious. She'd always been the bold one, but now it felt like she was pushing every limit just to see where the breaking point was. One evening, she refused to do her homework, saying it didn't matter because Mom doesn't care anyway. Emily overheard and snapped, grounding Sophie for a week. I thought it was too harsh, and when I said so, it turned into yet another fight. "She can't just disrespect us like that," Emily said. "She's not disrespecting us, she's hurting," I replied. "Maybe instead of punishing her, we should figure out why she feels that way." Emily rolled her eyes. "You always want to talk about feelings. Sometimes kids just need discipline." It felt like we were on opposite teams, each of us convinced we were right and the other was wrong. And the kids were caught in the middle, confused and hurt by the growing divide between us. As the months went on, Emily's success at work only highlighted how stagnant I felt in my own life. She was thriving, meeting new people, attending fancy events, and building a network of influential colleagues. Meanwhile, I was stuck in the same job, coming home to the same arguments, and wondering if this was all there was. One night, Emily came home late from a work event. She looked incredible, her makeup flawless, her dress hugging her figure in a way that made me feel like I was seeing her for the first time in years. But when I tried to kiss her, she turned away. "I'm exhausted," she said, brushing past me. "I just need to sleep." I stood there, feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. The woman I'd fallen in love with was still there, but she felt out of reach, like she belonged to a world I wasn't part of anymore. That night, as I lay awake, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing between us. Or maybe it had already changed, and I was just now realizing it. Either way, I knew one thing for certain. The scales in our relationship had tipped, and I wasn't sure if we could balance them again. It had been happening slowly, almost imperceptibly, over the past year. Emily's work parties and networking events started as occasional obligations, things she'd attend once every few months. But as her career advanced, those parties became more frequent. At first, I didn't mind. I understood that her new position came with more responsibilities, and I wanted to be supportive. But then she started staying later and later, coming home long after the kids were asleep. Sometimes, she'd come back smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers, or with her hair disheveled in a way that didn't match her usual polished appearance. I noticed the change in her demeanor, too. She seemed lighter after those events, almost giddy, like a part of her had come alive that I couldn't reach. It made me uneasy, but I told myself I was overthinking it. Emily had always been social and ambitious. This was just her way of thriving in her element, right? Then came the night of one particular party. She had mentioned it in passing a week before, saying it was mandatory. I offered to come along, thinking it might be good for us to spend some time together, even if it was at a corporate event. But she brushed off the suggestion. "It's just a networking thing," she said, barely looking up from her phone. "Spouses usually don't come." The night of the party, I stayed home with the kids. Mia was in her room, blasting music to drown out her frustration over a curfew disagreement earlier that day. Max and Sophie were watching a movie, oblivious to the storm brewing between their parents. I felt restless, but I convinced myself that Emily's absence was just part of the new normal. When she came home, it was late, much later than she had said it would be. I was sitting in the living room, waiting, my mind racing with all the worst-case scenarios I could imagine. When she finally walked in, her hair slightly disheveled and her lipstick smudged, something in my chest tightened. "How was the party?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Fine," she said, avoiding eye contact. "A lot of networking, like I said." Her words were casual, but her demeanor screamed guilt. I wanted to ask her outright if something had happened, but fear held me back. Instead, I let her retreat upstairs, the tension between us growing heavier with each passing moment. A week later, I found the truth. Emily had been rushing out the door that morning, late for a meeting, when she left her phone on the counter. It buzzed with a message just as I was clearing the breakfast dishes. I glanced at it out of habit, expecting to see a work notification. But what I saw instead made my stomach drop. "Andrew, last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you." My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, the words blurring together. I wanted to put the phone down, to pretend I hadn't seen it. But a part of me, the part that had been suspicious for months, wouldn't let it go. I opened the thread and saw messages that left no room for doubt. Flirty exchanges, plans to meet, and one damning photo of the two of them together at the party she'd claimed was just about networking. When Emily came home that evening, I was ready. The kids were asleep, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, her phone on the surface in front of me. "We need to talk," I said as soon as she walked through the door. She froze, her face pale as she saw the phone. "Jake, I can explain." "Explain what?" I snapped, my voice shaking with anger. "Explain how you lied to me? How you've been sneaking around with him while I've been here holding everything together? What could you possibly say that would make this okay?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she sank into the chair across from me. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said softly. "It didn't mean anything." I stared at her, disbelief and anger coursing through me. "Didn't mean anything? You cheated on me, Emily. You betrayed our family. How can you stand there and act like it's nothing?" "I was lonely," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I felt like you didn't see me anymore, like you didn't care. And Andrew, he made me feel." "What?" I snapped. "He made you feel special? Appreciated? Loved? What about me, Emily? What about everything I've done to keep this family together while you were off chasing your career?" Her silence was deafening. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like I didn't recognize her. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the Emily I had fallen in love with. She was someone else. Someone who had chosen her ambition and fleeting validation over the life we had built together. We tried counseling. For the kids' sake, I wanted to believe we could salvage what was left of our marriage. But the trust was gone, and no amount of therapy could bring it back. Emily moved out 6 months later, into a high-rise apartment downtown. The kids stayed with me most of the time, though they visited her on weekends. It was awkward at first, navigating birthdays and holidays, but we managed. Mia threw herself into soccer, using it as an outlet for her anger and confusion. She's 16 now, fiercely independent and determined not to let anyone, including me, get too close. Max, ever the sensitive one, struggled the most. He blamed himself for the divorce, convinced that if he had just been better behaved, we might have stayed together. Sophie, bold as ever, started acting out at school, pushing boundaries in ways that mirrored her mother. Emily and I barely spoke except for logistics about the kids. She seemed happy, or at least content, with her new life. I'd heard through mutual friends that she and Andrew were still together, though I tried not to think about it. As for me, I focused on rebuilding. I poured my energy into the kids, into my work, and into rediscovering who I was outside of being a husband. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the loneliness felt unbearable, when I lay awake wondering what I could have done differently. But slowly, I began to heal. The kids are older now, each of them navigating the world in their own way. Mia is looking at colleges, her sights set on a soccer scholarship. Max is thriving in high school, thanks to a supportive teacher who helped him find his confidence. And Sophie? She's still bold and stubborn, but she's channeling that energy into theater, where she's found a place to shine. Emily and I will never be what we once were, but we found a way to coexist for the sake of our children. There are still moments of tension, moments when the past feels too close, but we're learning to move forward. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive her, but I've come to accept that life doesn't always go the way you plan. People change, relationships evolve, and sometimes, love isn't enough to keep two people together. But as I watch Mia, Max, and Sophie grow into the incredible individuals they're becoming, I'm reminded that even in the midst of heartbreak, there is hope. And for now, that's enough.
How was the video? Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave your comment. Thank you. Goodbye.